Dr. James Redbird was kneeling in the excavation trench when his shovel struck something that shouldn't have been there. It was 2:37 p.m. on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in July in Illinois, and he had just found something that would change everything we thought we knew about Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico, mysteriously abandoned 600 years ago. But when he carefully cleared the dirt away to reveal the object, his stomach sank. Not because of the discovery itself. Because of what it meant to the 16 people whose jobs depended on him never finding exactly that. The piece of pottery in his hands had unmistakable markings. Carbon dating would later prove it was from 1425 AD. 75 years after Cahokia was supposedly abandoned. And it wasn't an isolated piece. Surrounding it were layers of burned soil, charred corn remains, fragments of tools. People had lived here. Long after all the books said the city was empty. James looked up from the trench. 200 meters away, he could see the parked tractors, equipment from the Riverside Development Corporation waiting to begin construction on the new shopping center. Contract signed. Investment of $340 million. 1,000 jobs promised to the needy community of Collinsville. And it all depended on Cahokia mounds having no additional archaeological significance in this specific area. James's phone vibrated. Text message from David Kowalski, director of the university's anthropology department, his direct boss for 8 years. Urgent meeting. My office. 4 p.m. Don't be late. James knew what that meant. Someone had seen something. Maybe the graduate assistant who was with him this morning. Maybe the security cameras that Riverside had generously installed around the site for protection. He photographed the pottery from 3 angles with his personal cell phone, not the official excavation camera. He carefully placed the artifact in a plastic bag, labeled it with its precise GPS location. Then he buried the bag in his backpack, under the lunch he hadn't eaten. Technically, removing an artifact without proper documentation violated all protocols. It could cost him his archaeologist's license. But leaving it here, where it would mysteriously disappear before tomorrow, that violated something deeper. James was 41. 3 decades since he left the Osage Reservation in Oklahoma, determined to study the past of native peoples through science, not just oral tradition. Ph.D. in anthropology from Northwestern. 12 years of teaching. 47 published papers. Solid reputation. And all of that would evaporate if he did what he needed to do. He climbed out of the trench, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. The July sun turned Illinois into an oven. In the distance, Monk's Mound rose, a 30-meter earthen structure built stone by stone, basket by basket, by a civilization no one fully understood. 10,000 people had lived here at its peak. Maybe 20,000. More populous than London at the same time. Ceremonial plazas. Complex trading system. Sophisticated astronomy. And then, around 1350 AD, they began to leave. Theories abounded. Climate change. Deforestation causing erosion. Overpopulation depleting resources. Political conflicts. Disease. A combination of all of these. But no one, no serious scholar, had suggested that Cahokia was not completely abandoned. That small groups remained for decades afterward. That perhaps the mystery of its disappearance was less dramatic and more human. This pottery changed the entire narrative. And narratives, James had learned painfully, were everything. Dr. Redbird. A shrill voice cut through his thoughts. Margaret Chen, Riverside's community relations representative, marching toward him with heels sinking into the grass. I hear there's been progress today on your final excavation. Great news. Code 4. Have you found something that will delay my shopping mall? Just routine, James replied, adjusting his backpack on his shoulders. Finishing up documentation. Wonderful. An overly practiced smile. Because as you know, we have a deadline. Construction starts August 1st. 3 weeks. The mayor is very excited about the jobs. I understand. And of course, she lowered her voice conspiratorially, Riverside's $2 million donation to the university's new anthropology lab is contingent on the schedule being met. It would be a shame if... She left the sentence hanging. The message was clear. Cooperate, and your university gets rich. Cause trouble and... Well... Margaret walked away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and veiled threats. James walked to his car, a 2009 Honda Civic with 240,000 kilometers on it. In the back seat was a box with more artifacts that officially didn't exist. Collected over the last 2 weeks. All suggesting the same impossible thing. Continued occupation well beyond 1350 AD. He wasn't the first to suspect it. There were rumors, whispers at archaeological conferences. But no one had solid evidence. And no one wanted to risk their career by challenging academic consensus. Especially when so much money was at stake. James started the car, the air conditioning battling the Illinois heat. He looked at Monk's Mound in the rearview mirror, a monument to a civilization the world called lost, built by people the world called primitive, abandoned for reasons the world called mysterious. But what if none of that was true? What if the real story was more complex, less convenient, less marketable? He had 3 hours until his meeting with Kowalski. 3 hours to decide whether to throw away everything he had built for a truth that no one wanted to hear. In his pocket, his phone vibrated again. This time, a message from an unidentified number. I know what you found. We need to talk. Meet me at the Arrowhead Cafe at 6 p.m. Come alone. James felt chills despite the heat. Someone was watching. Someone new. And suddenly, it wasn't just about career or money. It was about something bigger, about who controls history, who decides what is truth, and what happens when it's inconvenient to discover that we've been wrong all along. If you want to know what James discovered in the ruins of Cahokia that powerful people don't want you to know, and how a city lost 600 years ago could change everything about how we understand our past, subscribe to the channel, because this journey is just beginning. James arrived at David Kowalski's office 10 minutes early. It was a deliberate strategy. Showing up too eager seemed suspicious, but being too punctual seemed defiant. The room smelled of stale coffee and dusty books, the walls covered with maps of archaeological sites around the world. Kowalski was on the phone when James entered. He gestured for him to sit down, but didn't interrupt the call. Yes, Senator. I understand your concerns perfectly. No, I assure you that archaeology will not delay development. Of course, jobs are a priority. James felt a rising nausea. Senator Mitchell Thompson, a local politician whose re-election campaign depended heavily on the promise of economic revitalization through the Riverside Project. Kowalski hung up and rubbed his tired face. He was 58 years old, with completely white hair and eyes that had seen too much. A good man, deep down, but a man tired of fighting impossible battles against infinite money. James. It wasn't a greeting. It was a lament. Tell me you didn't find anything today. David. Please. Kowalski raised his hand. Just tell me we can sign the final report tomorrow saying the area is clear for construction. I can't do that. Heavy silence. Kowalski leaned back in his chair, which creaked in protest. What did you find? James took a photo on his cell phone. He showed the pottery. Preliminary dating suggests 1425, possibly later. There's an entire layer of occupation that no one has documented. David, people lived there for generations after they supposedly left. And you removed artifacts from the site. It wasn't a question. Kowalski knew. I had to protect the evidence. From what? From proper scientific process. Kowalski leaned forward. James, you've been in this field long enough to know how it works. Riverside hired an independent archaeological consulting firm that already approved 90% of the site. You were brought in as a final academic formality. Your job was to confirm, not discover. My job is to find the truth. Truth. Kowalski laughed bitterly. Do you think truth pays salaries? Keeps labs open? Funds student research? He pointed to the window overlooking the campus. We have 143 undergraduate anthropology students this year. Half of them are first-generation college students. Do you know how many would be able to continue if we cut programs due to lack of funding? James knew this argument. He had used versions of it for years to justify minor compromises. $2 million, James. A new lab. State-of-the-art equipment. Scholarships for 10 master's students. All of that evaporates if you blow up this project. What if I'm right? What if Cahokia wasn't abandoned the way we thought? Then you'll publish a paper in 5 years when you find another site to prove it. Kowalski sighed. Look, I get it. You're Osage. This history matters to you personally. But James, being objective as a scientist sometimes means separating personal identity from professional work. The phrase hung in the air like a thinly veiled insult. James felt a familiar anger, the weight of always having to be objective about the destruction of his own heritage while his white colleagues wrote emotionally about Greece and Rome. David, it's not about identity. It's about facts. Physical evidence. Which can be reinterpreted. Kowalski opened a drawer and took out a thick envelope. He pushed it across the table. Riverside is prepared to offer you private consulting. $50,000 a year for 3 years. Your name on the plaque of the new lab. First choice of research projects. James looked at the envelope without touching it. That's a bribe. It's an investment in the future of regional archaeology. Kowalski stood up and walked to the window. James, you're a good archaeologist. But you're not the only one. If you refuse this, we'll find someone else to sign the report. And you'll become that guy. The troublemaker. The activist disguised as a scientist. Good luck getting funding after that. James was silent. Kowalski was right about the mechanics of power. The system was designed to punish dissent. I have until noon tomorrow for your decision, Kowalski concluded. After that, I'll remove you from the project and bring in a replacement. James left the office with the envelope still on the table. He drove straight to Arrowhead Cafe, a small establishment in downtown Collinsville, far from campus and prying eyes. He arrived at 5:50 p.m. The cafe was almost empty, just a bored barista and an elderly man reading the newspaper in the corner. James ordered black coffee and sat by the window where he could see the door. At 6:05 p.m., the door opened. A woman entered, perhaps 65 years old, with long gray braided hair and a face marked by sun and time. Her clothes were simple but of good quality. She carried a worn leather briefcase. She looked around, spotted James, and walked straight to his table. Dr. Redbird? Her voice was low but firm. Who are you? Sarah Whitehorse. She sat down without asking permission. My family is Osage, like yours. But we are also direct descendants of people who lived in Cahokia. James studied her. Cahokia was abandoned centuries before Europeans arrived. How? It wasn't abandoned. It was dispersed. Sarah opened the briefcase and took out an old document, yellowed paper, handwritten. My great-grandmother told stories that her great-grandmother told her. Oral history preserved for generations. People didn't disappear from Cahokia. They left gradually, taking their knowledge and traditions with them. Some remained until the French arrived in the 17th century. Oral history is not scientific evidence. No. Sarah pushed the document toward him. French Missionary's Diary, 1698. Describes finding natives living in ancient mounds near the Great River. The location corresponds exactly to Cahokia. But no one publishes this because it contradicts the narrative of the mysterious lost city. James picked up the paper carefully. Old French, but legible. It described exactly what Sarah said. Why do you have this? My family has collected evidence for decades. We tried to share it with academics. We were ignored. They said we were biased, that we mixed fact with myth. She leaned forward. So when I heard that Osage archaeologist was excavating there, I thought maybe you would understand. Maybe you would have the courage to tell the truth. How did you know what I found today? Sarah smiled slightly. My grandson works on the excavation team. Graduate assistant. He called me this afternoon. The pieces fell into place. The young Native American man who had been with him this morning. Quiet. Observant. James had assumed he was just shy. Sarah, even if all this is true, I can't prove it. A pottery shard, an old diary. It's not enough against an entire system. You're not alone. Sarah took more documents out of her briefcase. I have contacts with 3 other archaeologists who found similar evidence at nearby sites. All were pressured into silence. One lost tenure. Another was transferred to Alaska. The third simply gave up academia. James leafed through documents. Suppressed reports. Photographs of artifacts that disappeared from collections. Internal university memos discussing how to manage inconvenient discoveries. It was a conspiracy, but not the kind involving rooms full of villains. It was a conspiracy of convenience. Hundreds of small decisions by people protecting careers, budgets, relationships. Death by 1,000 compromises. What do you want me to do? I want you to document everything. Properly. Scientifically. And then make it public. Sarah took his hand. Our ancestors built Cahokia. Not to create a tourist mystery. Not to be called a lost civilization, as if we were Atlantis. They built a real city, with real people, who faced real problems and made real decisions. They deserve the true story. Not a convenient version. James thought of all the classes he had taught, papers he had written, where he had described Cahokia as mysteriously abandoned. How many times had he perpetuated the same simplistic narrative? If I do that, I lose everything. My job, my reputation, my future in academia. I know. Sarah let go of his hand. My family lost everything when the Europeans arrived. Land, culture, language. My ancestors in Cahokia lost the city they built. But do you know what we never lost? The truth. We kept our history alive through generations. Because we knew that one day, someone would listen. She stood up, leaving the folder on the table. Everything you need is here. The decision is yours. James was left alone in the cafe with a folder full of secrets that could rewrite history, or destroy his life. His phone vibrated. A message from Margaret Chen at Riverside. Dr. Kowalski has informed me of the situation. Riverside is willing to double the offer. $100,000. Final consideration by 9 a.m. tomorrow. $100,000. 3 years' salary. All he had to do was sign a paper saying he hadn't found anything important. James looked out the cafe window. Outside, Collinsville went about its routine. People leaving work, children playing, normal life continuing. None of these people cared about 600-year-old pottery or archaeological debates. But they did care about jobs. About development. About their families' futures. And James, alone with an impossible decision, realized there was no right answer. Only a choice between different kinds of wrong. James didn't sleep. He spent the night sorting through the contents of Sarah's folder. Documents, photos, the French diary from 1698. Each piece building a case that academia had deliberately ignored. At 3 a.m., he called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a colleague at the University of Iowa. I found something in Cahokia that contradicts the accepted chronology. Long pause. So you didn't call me. 3 of my colleagues tried to publish similar evidence about late occupation. One is facing a defamation lawsuit. Another lost funding. The third disappeared from academia. Rebecca. There's a pattern. Riverside Development has its fingers in 40 projects in 6 states. Always the same operation: cheap land near native sites, complacent archaeologists, construction before anyone looks too closely. Her voice lowered. But if you have solid evidence, I know a journalist at the New York Times. Claire Davidson. A platform that academia can't easily silence. By 6 a.m., James was back in Cahokia with his own equipment. If he was going to do this, he would make it scientifically irrefutable. He documented everything: scale photographs, soil sampling, stratigraphic mapping. He found more. Fragments of charred fabric. Corn seeds from a variety dating to after 1400. Venetian glass beads from 17th century French trade. Cahokia was not abandoned in 1350. Groups remained for centuries. At 8:30 a.m., an engine approached. Margaret Chen got out of a pickup truck with 2 security guards. Dr. Redbird. Working outside authorized hours. Documenting findings. Work that ended yesterday. She handed him a document. The university signed a revised agreement this morning. New consultants have taken over. Your services are no longer needed. James read it. Kowalski's signature. 6:45 this morning. They had removed him. The collected material belongs to the university and must be returned immediately, Margaret continued. Security guards approached. James climbed out of the trench, backpack with all the material on his back. I'll need an official receipt. If you could accompany us to the field office. Trap. If he went, he would lose everything. I prefer to deliver it directly to Dr. Kowalski. Proper protocol. He is unavailable. James turned toward the car. Security guards blocked his way. It would be easier if you cooperated. 2 men, him alone, isolated area. But he had an ace up his sleeve, his cell phone set to transmit live video. Everything was being recorded. Are you preventing me from leaving? Margaret intervened. Of course not. Then we'll settle this with a lawyer present. James walked around them. This time they let him go, but they photographed his license plate. He drove to St. Louis. Thomas Bearcloud, a Lakota lawyer specializing in cultural heritage, examined the evidence. You have a case under NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection Act. But we need to act fast. If they start construction, reversing it will be exponentially difficult. How long? Hours. Maybe days. Thomas picked up the phone. I'm going to file an emergency petition in federal court. But James, this is going to get ugly. While Thomas prepared the documents, James called Claire Davidson at the Times. He explained and sent photos. I can have the story ready tomorrow. But I need corroborating sources. I have documents. A French diary from 1698. Preserved oral history. Oral history will be challenged. I need other archaeologists. James contacted 3 names Rebecca had mentioned. 2 did not respond. The third, Dr. Michael Thornton, at a local museum after losing his academic position, agreed to speak anonymously. I found similar evidence in Missouri. Occupation until the 1600s. I reported it honestly. I was destroyed. Bitter voice. Yes, I'll talk. But Claire protects my identity. The pieces were falling into place. Story. Legal action. Evidence. Irrefutable case. Then at 4 p.m., the phone rang. His mother in Oklahoma. James? Are you okay? I got a strange call. A man asking about you. Your finances, family, if you had alcohol problems. His blood ran cold. What did you say? I hung up. But what's going on? They were investigating his life. Looking for ammunition to destroy his credibility. That night, an email from an anonymous address. No text. Just attachments, photos of him in Cahokia, at the lawyer's office, on the phone. A timestamp on each one. The last photo was of his house. Taken 20 minutes ago. Someone had been following him all day. They knew where he lived. James sat down, feeling real fear for the first time. This wasn't an academic game. It was war. The phone rang. Sarah Whitehorse. I heard they removed you. Are you safe? Physically, yes. Professionally, being destroyed. Then we'll speed things up. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., press conference at the entrance to Cahokia. Me, you, Thomas Bearcloud, 5 tribal elders. We'll announce the legal petition and make the evidence public. Sarah, this is going to blow up. My ancestors built that city with their own hands. I won't stand by while they destroy what's left. Neither will you. James looked at the artifacts on his desk. Fragments of lives lived centuries ago. People who persisted. All right. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. But he knew that in the next 16 hours, the other side would do everything in its power to stop them. The war for the truth about Cahokia was beginning. And James Redbird was on the front lines of a battle that would decide who has the right to tell America's story. James arrived in Cahokia at 9:15 a.m. The parking lot was already full. News vans from 3 local channels, cars of curious onlookers, and conspicuously, a black Riverside truck parked directly in front of the chosen conference location. Sarah Whitehorse was there with 5 tribal elders, all dressed in traditional attire. Thomas Bearcloud was organizing microphones. Claire Davidson of the New York Times was checking recording equipment. Margaret Chen got out of the truck with a man in a suit whom James didn't recognize. They walked straight up to him. Dr. Redbird, this is Gerald Ashford, Riverside's chief lawyer. Tom was courteous but his eyes were icy. We'd like to talk before you make an irreparable mistake. There's nothing to talk about. There is a lot. Ashford opened his briefcase. We have here a copy of the contract you signed with the university. Clause 7b clearly stipulates that any material collected during the project is institutional property. You removed artifacts without authorization. That is theft. I protected evidence from mysteriously disappearing, as happened in Missouri, in Arkansas, in unfounded allegations. Ashford interrupted. We also have testimony from 3 colleagues questioning your objectivity. Apparently, you have a history of mixing political activism with science. James felt familiar anger. Defending cultural heritage is not political activism. It depends on your perspective. Ashford smiled coldly. But here's what really matters. If you proceed with this conference, we will sue you personally for defamation, breach of contract, and tortious interference in business relations. We estimate damages at $15 million. $15 million. A number designed to destroy anyone. Sarah approached. Empty threats. Under NAGPRA, sites of significance to Native peoples have federal protection. NAGPRA requires proof of direct connection to a federally recognized tribe. Ashford looked at her. Your family claims descent from Cahokia, but there is no anthropological documentation establishing a link between Cahokia and modern Osage tribes. So legally, you have no standing. It was true. Cahokia had been abandoned centuries before European records. Connections were inferred, not documented. Thomas intervened. We are prepared for extensive litigation on this. With what money? Riverside has unlimited resources. You have, Ashford gestured vaguely. What? Crowdfunding. It was 9:55 a.m. Journalists were waiting. Cameras were rolling. The moment of truth was approaching. Then something happened that no one expected. An old pickup truck roared into the parking lot, braking sharply. The door opened. A man got out, perhaps 70 years old, his face weathered by the sun, his hands those of a man who had worked his entire life. Robert! Sarah exclaimed in surprise. What are you doing here? Robert Whitehorse, Sarah's older brother, walked straight up to the group with a cardboard box in his arms. James knew him, a Vietnam veteran, then a farmer, a man who avoided politics and academia. "Sarah called me yesterday." His voice was deep and tired. "She said she was going to need help. So I brought this." He placed the box on the hood of the car. "My grandfather gave me this when I was 12. He told me to keep it, never show it to white people, because they would try to steal it or say it was fake." He opened the box. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, intact ceramic objects, stone tools, and something that made James stop breathing, a necklace of copper beads and seashells, identical in design to those found at Cahokia. "My grandfather said that his great-grandfather worked as a guide for French missionaries in the 1720s. He took them to the ancient mounds where relatives still lived. These objects were given to him by an elder woman who lived there. She said, 'When white people say we have disappeared, show them this. Prove that we remain.'" Absolute silence. Claire Davidson was already frantically taking pictures. Ashford recovered first. "Objects of unverified provenance prove nothing." "Then let's verify them." James carefully picked up the necklace. "Carbon dating can be done in 48 hours. Style analysis confirms the period. And if Robert's story is true, this is physical evidence of continuous occupation until the 18th century. Theft of native artifacts is a federal crime," Thomas added calmly. "Under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. Riverside can sue James, but first they'll have to explain why they were so eager to build without a full investigation. Almost as if they knew they would find something inconvenient." Ashford looked at Margaret. Something unspoken passed between them. Then he turned to James. "We have a final proposal. Riverside delays construction for 6 months. Allows for a complete excavation supervised by a neutral university. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement about procedural irregularities." It was almost a victory. 6 months, proper excavation. But, at a price, silence about systemic corruption. James looked at Sarah, at Robert, at the tribal elders watching. He thought of all the other people Riverside had silenced. All the other stories buried along with the evidence. No, his voice was firm. No silence agreements. Full excavation with tribal oversight. And an independent investigation into evidence suppression in all previous Riverside projects. "You're committing professional suicide." "I'm choosing truth over convenience. For the first time in a long time." Ashford closed his briefcase. "See you in court." He and Margaret left. It was 10:02 a.m. The cameras were waiting. James, Sarah, Robert, and Thomas took their places at the microphones. Behind them, Monk's Mound rose, a silent witness to it all. Claire Davidson asked the first question. "Dr. Redbird, can you explain what you found?" James took a deep breath. "For decades, we have taught that Cahokia was mysteriously abandoned around 1350. This narrative is convenient. It creates an aura of mystery, allows us to ignore cultural continuity, and facilitates the development of land considered unoccupied. But evidence I have collected in recent weeks shows continued occupation until at least 1425, possibly until the 1700s. He showed photos of artifacts, explained dating, detailed stratigraphic layers. He spoke as an archaeologist, presenting irrefutable scientific data. Then Sarah spoke as a descendant, sharing oral history preserved for generations. Robert showed objects from his grandfather. Tribal elders testified about cultural connections. It was no longer just archaeology. It was restoration of stolen truth. A local channel reporter asked, "But what about the jobs? The mall promised 1,000 jobs." Thomas replied, "There are 47 other locations in Collinsville suitable for commercial development. Only one Cahokia. The question isn't jobs versus history. It's whether we're willing to destroy irreplaceable heritage for convenience." "Dr. Redbird," another journalist asked, "Riverside claims you have a political agenda. that you mix science with activism. James looked directly at the camera. For years, I taught a convenient version of Cahokia. Mysterious. Lost. Exotic. Because that version didn't threaten anyone. It didn't complicate narratives. It didn't delay construction. His voice broke slightly. But science without courage is not science. It is merely servitude to power. The conference lasted 45 minutes. Questions, answers, evidence presented. Claire Davidson had a bombshell story. Local channels had dramatic confrontations. Social media was already exploding with hashtags. When it was over, James sat down on the curb, exhausted. Sarah sat down beside him. "My grandfather told me something when I was a child," she said calmly. "He said that Cahokia wasn't abandoned because people gave up. It was abandoned because the world changed. The climate changed. Trade changed. Politics changed. So people made a smart decision. They dispersed, taking their knowledge and culture with them. It wasn't failure. It was adaptation. And we turned it into a mystery. Because mystery sells. Mystery has no owners. Mystery makes no demands." Sarah looked at Monk's Mound. "But truth has owners. Truth makes demands. That's why it's dangerous." James's phone rang. "Kowalski. You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you off campus tomorrow." "I understand. James, you've destroyed your career for nothing. In 6 months, no one will remember this story. Riverside will find a way to build. You'll be unemployed, sued, forgotten. Maybe." James looked at Robert, still holding the box with his grandfather's belongings. "But at least when my grandson asks me what I did when it mattered, I'll be able to look him in the eye." He hung up. Claire Davidson approached. "The story comes out tomorrow on the front page. I'm also doing an investigative series on the suppression of evidence in archaeological projects. 3 other archaeologists have agreed to speak publicly now that you've broken the silence." Thomas had better news. A federal judge has issued a temporary injunction. Construction is suspended until a full hearing. And the state attorney general has opened an investigation into Riverside's practices. James should have felt triumphant. But he only felt deep exhaustion and a strange peace. He had lost his job, his reputation, his academic future. He would face lawsuits, debts, years of legal battles. But when he looked at Monk's Mound, a monument erected by the hands of Sarah's ancestors, Robert's ancestors, and so many others, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real, not convenient. Because in the end, it didn't matter how many careers he built if they were based on convenient silences. What mattered was whether, when the time came, he had the courage to choose difficult truth over comfortable lies. And James Redbird had finally made that choice. 8 months later, James was on the edge of a new trench in Cahokia, but now as an independent consultant. The March wind carried cold, but the sun promised spring. The excavation was different. A team of 15 archaeologists, half of them Native Americans, including Sarah's grandson as co-director. Tribal oversight. Complete transparency. Every discovery documented publicly in real time. They had found more than James had imagined. Complex migratory patterns. Cahokia did not die. It transformed. Residents gradually dispersed over the course of a century, taking their knowledge to other regions. No mystery. Intentional diaspora. Dr. Redbird. Amanda, a Potawatomi student. "We found something." In the trench, a ceramic fragment with pictorial marks showing the movement of people. Preliminary date, 1380 AD. It was a map. Instructions left for those who stayed behind. Generations of archaeologists searched for mystery when the evidence was right there. People leaving signs for the future. Phone vibrated. Claire Davidson, Article 1 Pulitzer. "Thank you for having the courage." The story had triggered an avalanche. Federal investigation of Riverside in 6 states. 3 executives resigned. Senator lost re-election. 23 sites reopened for proper investigation. But James had paid a devastating price. Riverside had sued him. Although the case was dismissed, legal fees, $80,000 in debt. House mortgaged. Savings depleted. No major university would hire him. He was problematic. His marriage didn't survive. Divorced 5 months ago. At 42, he had won. He had saved Cahokia, changed policies. But he lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, drove a car with 280,000 miles on it, and didn't know if he could pay for his daughter's college. Victory was real. It would never be called easy. James. Sarah crossed the field, smiling. The National Park Service will redesignate Cahokia as a Site of Tribal National Significance. The first of its kind. And the Smithsonian wants an exhibit. You as a consultant. I accept. Sarah studied him. Are you okay? Really? James thought. Some days I wake up with regret. I think about everything I've lost. Days when I see former colleagues receiving awards, and I'm struggling to pay the bills. And other days? Other days I know I did the only thing that mattered. He gestured to the team. Before, we had 2 native archaeologists. Now we have 15 in this region alone. Because they saw that it's possible to challenge the system. Sarah nodded. My grandson corrected his teacher in class yesterday about Cahokia. The teacher thanked him and changed the entire lesson. Small victories. Not spectacular, but real. That afternoon, a Zoom call with 3 native students from different states, all citing Cahokia as inspiration. Dr. Redbird, was it worth it? Losing everything. It depends on how you measure it. Financially. Professionally. No. It cost me everything. My marriage didn't survive. I wake up at 3 a.m. worried about debt. Uncomfortable silence. But morally, spiritually, yes. Because when it mattered, when I had something to lose, I had the courage to choose truth. And most won't. They'll choose safety, because it's rational. But if you want to do work that challenges power, that restores silence voices, you have to know it will cost something. And decide in advance if you're willing to pay. A student wiped away tears. Thank you. I needed to hear that. James walked to Monk's Mound at sunset. He climbed 156 steps, each representing the work of people who lived centuries ago. From the top, he could see all of Cahokia. In the distance, land where a shopping mall was never built. Riverside had declared bankruptcy. The land would now be a tribal cultural center. He thought of Roger Boisjoli, the engineer who had tried to stop Challenger. He had lived with PTSD, isolation. But changes at NASA after the disaster saved future lives. Victories like that were never clean. But they were real. The phone rang. Maya, his daughter, 14. Dad. I gave a presentation on Cahokia at school. I used your research. The teacher said it was the best work he'd ever seen. A lump in his throat. I'm proud. I know things are hard. But I understand why you did what you did. When I grow up, I want to be like you. Someone who chooses right even when it's hard. After she hung up, James stood at the top as the sun disappeared, tears streaming down his face. He had lost so much. But he had gained something no salary could buy, the ability to be a real example to his daughter, not just a theoretical lesson in integrity. Because we are not defined by how many battles we win, but by which ones we choose to fight. James Redbird had fought for the truth when it was inconvenient. He had paid the full price. And he would do it again. Not because he was a hero, but because some things, truth, justice, memory, are worth more than safety. Cahokia was no longer a mystery. It was a real city, built by real people. And their true stories were finally being told. Not because it was convenient, but because it was true. And truth, James learned painfully, always has a cost. But comfortable lies cost the soul. If this story has made you think differently about courage, about what matters, about the cost of doing the right thing, subscribe to the channel. Because we will all face moments when we need to choose between safety and integrity. And when that time comes, stories like this can give us the strength to choose right, even when it costs everything.